Imagine being part of a clinical trial without having to visit a hospital. Your smartwatch tracks your heart rate while you sleep. A sensor on your arm measures your glucose levels continuously. Your smartphone sends daily symptom questionnaires. And all this data flows directly to researchers, giving them a far more detailed picture of how a treatment affects your daily life than any clinic visit could provide. This is not science fiction, it is the rapidly growing world of digital health technologies in clinical trials, and it is transforming how medicines are developed. Digital health technologies in clinical trials fall into three broad categories. First, wearables, devices worn on the body, like smartwatches, activity trackers, continuous glucose monitors, ECG patches, and smart rings. These collect continuous physiological data in real-world settings. Second, sensors, connected blood pressure cuffs, digital stethoscopes, pulse oximeters, and even ingestible sensors that track medication adherence. And third, apps and platforms, electronic patient-reported outcome apps that replace paper diaries, telemedicine platforms for remote visits, and digital therapeutic applications that are themselves approved as treatments. Together, these technologies are reshaping every phase of clinical research. The difference between traditional and digital data collection is fundamental. In a traditional trial, data is collected during 4 to 8 clinic visits per year. You get a snapshot, a single blood pressure reading taken in a stressful clinic environment, a patient trying to remember how they felt over the past 3 months. Paper diaries are notoriously unreliable. Patients often fill them out from memory right before their appointment. With digital technologies, the picture is completely different. A continuous glucose monitor gives 1,440 readings per day instead of one lab value every 3 months. Activity is tracked automatically. Symptoms are recorded in real time. It is the difference between a photograph and a movie. The numbers tell a story of rapid adoption. The digital health and clinical trials market is worth over $15 billion and growing at 25% annually. Over 80% of U.S. adults now own a smartphone, making device-based data collection feasible for most patient populations. And approximately 60% of clinical trials now use some form of digital health technology, a 5-fold increase since 2015. The FDA has responded to this shift with comprehensive guidance on how digital health technologies should be verified, validated, and used in registration trials. In short, digital health is no longer experimental, it is becoming the standard of care in clinical research. Modern wearables can measure an extraordinary range of physiological signals. On the cardiovascular side, they track heart rate continuously, heart rate variability, single-lead ECG for detecting atrial fibrillation, blood pressure through optical sensors, and oxygen saturation. For activity and sleep, they measure step counts, active minutes, sedentary time, sleep stages, circadian rhythms, and even fall detection. For movement disorders like Parkinson's, they detect tremors and analyze gait. For metabolic conditions, continuous glucose monitors provide real-time glucose readings. For respiratory trials, connected spirometers measure lung function, and cough frequency can be tracked automatically. Almost any physiological parameter that matters in a clinical trial can now be measured continuously. Electronic patient-reported outcomes, or ePRO, represents one of the most impactful digital health innovations. Instead of paper diaries that patients fill out sporadically, ePRO apps send daily questionnaires directly to the patient's smartphone, with timestamps that prevent backfilling. The results are striking. ePRO completion rates range from 80 to 95%, compared to 30 to 60% with paper diaries. These platforms also enable real-time safety monitoring. If a patient reports severe pain or suicidal thoughts, the study team can be alerted immediately. The FDA first issued guidance on PROs in 2009 and updated it for digital health in 2023. Multiple drugs have now been approved using ePRO data as the primary endpoint for labeling claims. For every benefit of digital health and trials, there is a corresponding challenge. On the benefit side, continuous data replaces episodic snapshots, Objective measurements eliminate recall bias, real-world data avoids the white coat effect, and remote data collection enables decentralized trials that reach patients who cannot easily travel to a clinic. But the challenges are equally real. Device burden means patients must charge, wear, and remember their devices. Consumer-grade sensors may not match the accuracy of medical-grade devices. The digital divide means older and lower-income patients may be excluded. And the sheer volume of data, millions of data points per patient, requires new analytical approaches that traditional biostatistics cannot handle. The regulatory framework for digital health in clinical trials has evolved rapidly. The FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence, established in 2020, coordinates agency policy. The key requirement is that any digital health technology used to capture a trial endpoint must be fit for purpose, meaning it is verified to measure accurately, validated to measure what it claims to measure, and usable by the target patient population. On the data privacy side, HIPAA governs health data in the United States, while Europe's GDPR provides even broader protections for device-generated health data. And the FDA has issued increasingly detailed guidance on device cybersecurity, recognizing that connected devices are vulnerable to hacking. Several landmark studies demonstrate the power of digital health in clinical research. The Apple Heart Study was the largest virtual study ever conducted. More than 419,000 participants enrolled in just 8 months through the Apple Watch app. It used the watch's optical sensor to detect irregular pulses suggesting atrial fibrillation, and demonstrated the feasibility of enrolling and monitoring patients at an unprecedented scale. In Parkinson's disease, multiple pharmaceutical companies now use smartphone sensors to measure patients' gait, tremor, and speech at home, turning daily activities like finger tapping and walking into objective, continuous motor function data. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, home pulse oximeters and symptom tracking apps enabled trials to continue despite lockdowns. One of the key design decisions in any digital health trial is whether patients use their own devices or receive a standardized device from the sponsor. Bring your own device, or BYOD, is more convenient and less expensive. Patients use their familiar smartphones, and the sponsor avoids the cost of purchasing, shipping, and retrieving devices. But it comes with data quality variability, because different phone models and operating system versions have different sensor characteristics. Provisioned devices are identical for every patient, ensuring consistent data quality. But they are much more expensive and create device burden. Patients must learn to use and charge unfamiliar equipment. The choice depends on whether the endpoint is exploratory or intended for regulatory submission. The volume of data generated by digital health technologies is staggering. A single patient with a continuous glucose monitor produces over 10,000 data points per day, that is 1,440 glucose readings, continuous heart rate, step counts, and sleep data. In a 500-patient, 12-month study using just 3 devices per patient, the total dataset can exceed 5 billion data points. Compare this to the traditional approach for diabetes trials, for HbA1c values per year, per patient. The digital approach generates 3.6 million additional data points per patient per year. This data density demands entirely new analytical methods, machine learning, signal processing, feature extraction, and dimensionality reduction, rather than traditional biostatistical approaches. Despite the promise of digital health, one of the biggest operational headaches is getting different devices to work together. A typical digital health trial might use 5 to 10 different devices from different manufacturers, each with its own data format, application programming interface, and cloud storage platform. Standards like HL7FHIR for healthcare data exchange and IEEE 11073 for medical device communication have been developed to address this, but adoption is still inconsistent. Dedicated integration platforms are emerging. Companies like Metadata, Oracle, and others now offer sensor data cloud services that aggregate and standardize data from multiple devices. But for now, data integration remains the most common source of headaches in digital health trials. Looking ahead, 3 directions are particularly exciting. First, digital biomarkers are moving from exploratory use to becoming primary endpoints in registration trials. Digital gait speed in muscular dystrophy, smartphone-based cognition tests in Alzheimer's, and continuous glucose metrics in diabetes are all gaining regulatory acceptance as valid endpoints. Second, AI-native analysis is transforming how we handle the massive data volumes. Machine learning can identify patterns and early signals of drug effect that traditional endpoints would miss entirely. And third, the ultimate vision is continuous home monitoring. Patients wear sensors at home 24/7, with clinic visits becoming rare events for complex procedures only. We are moving from episodic snapshots to continuous stories. So here is the bottom line. For decades, clinical trials have measured patients in brief, occasional clinic visits, a few hours that had to represent months of real life. With the white coat effect, recall bias, and paper diaries, we were working with incomplete and sometimes inaccurate data. Digital health technologies are changing that fundamental limitation. With wearables, sensors, and smartphones, we can finally see the full picture of how treatments affect patients in their actual daily lives. The challenges, device burden, the digital divide, interoperability, and data analysis are real but solvable. The transformation from episodic snapshots to continuous stories is one of the most important changes happening in clinical research today.